Welcome to the STARTS4Water vlog. My name is Anne Nichten. I'm your anchor woman. In this series, we'll have conversations with artists who are currently working as artists in residence at the STARTS Partner Institutes. I would like to welcome our guest today, Theresa Schubert from Berlin, who is doing her residency at Cittadelarte in Biella, Italy, and Elisa Palazzi, researcher at the Institute of Atmospheric Sciences and Climate in Torino in Italy. Welcome to both of you. And I would like to ask Theresa if you can introduce yourself and tell us in short something about the project that you are developing in Italy.
Yes. Well, I'm a media artist based in Berlin, and for around 15 years I work on the nature technology topic, specifically investigating the human impact on the environment, but also how we can use technology for better relationships maybe with nature. I prepared a small presentation to give an insight into the current status of my residency. So I'm sharing the screen with you now. For the STARTS4Water program, I am working, my host is Cittadelarte, Fondazione Pistoletto in Biella in Italy. And I'm working on the challenge of rebuilding relationships with fluvial systems, and specifically to look at fluvial systems as indicators of climate change and its impact. So the starting point for my residency was this question: how can we use technology and ultimately repurpose or reinvent them to create respectful relationships between ourselves and the planet? And this could include non-human, biological, and also artificial entities. So during my residency visits that I did so far and the research processes, I decided to focus on glaciers as the starting point of fluvial systems. And particularly, I'm fascinated by glaciers because they hold such an extreme importance, not only as storages of water, but also of our Earth's past. So in the ice embedded is information about climate from thousands of years ago, from radiation, pollution, organic materials. And a lot of this ice will melt away with climate change because, as we know, many glaciers start to regress, and above a specific height level, probably most of the glaciers won't be able to survive. So I'm developing now something like a work trilogy, one could say. So it's a three-part, three works that can go together, but they could also be seen individually. And the first one is a video work where I'm reimagining glaciers through the help of artificial intelligence. So I'm creating something like a synthetic archive of glaciers. The second one is looking at the conservation aspect of Earth memory, and I'm using glacial meltwater in specific sculptures to store them. And the third one is how glacial water systems could be simulated in the computer, and maybe how the climate impact can be made visible through them. So I started my research with several visits to the Glaciological Committee in Turin. That's an organization that's dedicated to researching glaciers, but also archiving historic photographs. And I did several on-site visits in the region, looking, well, from the mountaintop into the pole valley, looking at different formations, aspects, and also cultural and industrial impact on waterways. So the first thing I did was spending some more time in the glacier archive in Turin and collecting historical photographs, but I also came across handwritten notebooks of Adito Desio, that's a glaciologist of the 18th and 19th century. And I started to decipher and translate his field notes where he was describing the landscape. And what I am doing now is that I'm using some artificial intelligence model, like StyleGAN, for example, and I'm training it with these archive images. What you can see here on the picture is a very early, like many tiles. Each tile represents one synthetic glacier that the neural network learned, and after several iterations in the neural network, the images start to look more real. So it's now kind of learning features of how glaciers look like. That's a direct comparison between a very early step in the learning process and the later step of the same image in progression. So my idea is to create a video out of that where you can see over time how the machine learning model learns how a glacier could look like. And in the second step, I'm using the text input from the notebooks from Adito Desio, where he described the landscape. There is a second neural network that's called VQ-Clip2GAN, and that knows words. It knows the meaning of words and can connect it to visual features. So the idea is that I feed it with the notebook descriptions and then link it to the aesthetic features that the neural network has learned in an earlier step. So it's kind of recreating the landscapes of Adito Desio, but from a synthetic viewpoint of a neural network. And this is kind of the second work process in this trilogy, the conservation of Earth's memory. I was working with a glass blower to create these glass-blown sculptures. They are kind of inspired by glacier tongue formation. So I made these mountain terrain models that we used as casts to imprint glass on top. So they are kind of inspired by how glaciers look like. And these glass-blown forms should serve as vessels that should be later filled with meltwater from glaciers and sealed so that these sculptures become kind of a storage where the meltwater can stay forever, or as long as the glass sculpture exists, at least, because it's a closed system, so nothing can evaporate or go out of it. And so this should be a sculpture with several of these pieces where the people can like go and look at them and kind of become a closer and also haptic feeling of the situation. And the third aspect that I'm looking at now is how to simulate glacial water systems. So I was thinking about, well, climate change and time, and I came very much like the metaphor of the hourglass, where you have the sand on top and it comes down, well, and then kind of all the material was in is now at the bottom, and unless you turn it, well, you can turn it and then it starts over, or if you don't turn it, then, well, it's just over. So I kind of like this idea. So I'm using this as a metaphor for a simulation system that mimics ice and a melting process. I'm working now with a developer, Sage Jensen, and we kind of make this self-organizing system where we have particles and they behave in the first instance like ice, like glacial ice mask, and then they kind of float down and they start to melt, and then they become water drops, and then kind of like a water system. So this is very much in progress, but this is the very, very first screen video of what's happening in this simulation. It's kind of a very slow process. So this you have to imagine as a more immersive video experience where you could look at and stand for a long time. And if we manage and have time for it, the second idea is to also open it to the environment. I wanted to use a CO2 sensor because that's the gas that's most commonly associated with climate change, and have people breathe into the CO2 sensor. And then the CO2 sensor could cause like a disturbance in the simulation system, so that it would be a very literal translation of human impact on the environment and a way for people to engage and also, well, play a little bit with the simulation. So I think I talked for a very long time, but that's it. Now I stop.
That was a lovely presentation. Thank you so much, Theresa. We come back to your work during the conversation, but first I would like to ask Elisa to introduce herself and her work and how that connects to Theresa's project.
My name is Elisa Palazzi and I am affiliated with the University of Turin currently, where I teach as a climate physics teacher. My research interests are mainly on the study of climate change, and particularly looking at specific environments which are mountain environments. So I study climate changes in the mountains, in the very high altitude regions, both in Italy and in the other mountain ranges of the world. And what I specifically do is to understand what are the main causes driving, for example, the observed glacier retreat or snow decrease, and the biodiversity changes and ecosystem mismatches. So all the consequences which we know, which we observe, which are in a way told by the research which are performed, and trying to understand what are the driving mechanisms, in particular involving the temperature changes and the temperature increase and changes in precipitation, both liquid and solid precipitation. For example, one interesting aspect occurring in the mountains is that the temperature trend is higher and faster than compared to the globally average temperature increase. So mountains have warmed at a faster rate. And this has, of course, consequences on the natural and, of course, also social systems which are related to the mountains. So one of the aspects which are most interesting in studying these topics is to understand the links between what happens in the mountains and what happens downstream. So we are strongly interconnected, all of us, with mechanisms occurring in the high altitude regions because of the different ecosystem services which are delivered by the mountains. So water, of course, first of all, this is the most important good, which we use for free from the mountains, but we also benefit from the fresh air, the wood, recreational services, protection against natural disasters, etc., etc. So my study is a very physical one, studying temperature, precipitation, changes in the partition between rain and snow, for example, but of course the applications are a lot and also need to have a holistic view of the problem involving not only the natural sciences, but also the social, economical sciences. As for Theresa applications, I like a lot her study on the in a way ice memory, I would say. So the past in a way is linked to the future, to the present and to the future in the ice, and this is something which has a scientific value, enormous scientific value. We study the ice also to reconstruct the past climate variations and variabilities, and this knowledge is important to better understand what is happening now, the specificities of climate change occurring now, and also to make more reliable future projections. So this part is very interesting to me. Of course, also the idea which emerges from Theresa's work about the complex systems. Theresa not only tries to apply the artificial intelligence, machine learning techniques, but she has also this important view of complex systems in which we are immersed. The climate system is a dynamical and complex system where we are all nodes in a network and we are all interconnected. And I like a lot this approach.
Thank you, thank you. Wow, it's been really interesting to hear both of you introducing your work, but maybe, Elisa, you could explain us a little bit more about the connection between those, let's say, archives with visual materials and field notes that Theresa is working with today's research into the climate system.
Mm-hmm. Yes, this was also very interesting. I didn't know Theresa's advancements in her work, so this is the first time I see actually what she's doing. And actually, in order to study climate, we need lots of data. Now, climate is evaluated at least over 30 years of data. This is a recommendation of the World Meteorological Organization. So since there are interannual variabilities, of course, in the climate system, there are internal variabilities, but these occur over very short time ranges. The shortest is the meteorological rapidity of weather. But of course, in order to study climate and to, in a way, derive long-term trends, which are statistically significant, we need to observe the weather for a lot of time. And this time is at least 30 years. In the last 30 years, in the last 100 years, we have lots of direct measurements of the climate variables, temperature, precipitation, humidity, even river discharge probably. But of course, we need to have other kind of data to go back in time. If, for example, historical documents are really important because We can understand a lot of information also reading at these papers, for example, and of course also the natural archives like the ice cores, the sediment cores, the tree rings, and still others allow us to really reconstruct the weather of the past up to 1 million years. And this information is important because, again, we have the possibility to compare what is happening now, especially in terms of rapidity, with past climate variability, which was much slower than today. And looking at the past, we can also try to find analogs for the possible future and see what we could expect, no, based on different scenarios, basically of our behavior, since we are important player now in the climate system. So I see and appreciate a lot this link Theresa has mentioned between past and future, because this is the same approach which we use in the science, actually. So this is an important connection, I think.
How did you decide to kind of frame your field of focus for your artwork? Because I can imagine this is so wide and so impactful as a challenge that it can lead you kind of anywhere on the globe.
That's true. Yeah, but when I visited the Comitato Glaciologico Italiano, the let's say glacier archive in Turin, I was immediately fascinated by their images, also the maps that they had, and then they also showed me these handwritten field notes, the diaries. I just thought that this is somehow like a hidden treasure, maybe, that hasn't been explored or published so well. And I felt that, yeah, that was a good starting point. And it was just very interesting visual material as well. So as an artist, I was obviously intrigued to also look at that and work with it. And then, yeah, it was kind of an intuitive decision. So then I thought, okay, glaciers are maybe a good starting point. They are like on top on the mountains, and then the water flows down. It's kind of, a very natural process as well. And to take this as a starting point for the project.
Please.
Yeah.
Please.
For your question about the regionality, in a way, of course, global warming is the global phenomenon, and it is called global because actually 98% of the land surface is of the Earth surface is interested by this phenomenon. But of course, the manifestation of global warming can be different from region to region. And here, the difficulty to choose something to start with. There are some commonalities, however, in the way some ecosystems respond to global warming. For example, of course, in the mountains, almost everywhere, glaciers are retreating, snow is disappearing, biodiversity is decreasing as well, etc., etc. And there are at the same time specificities from one mountain to another one. For example, in terms of the latitude where one mountain range is located. In the tropics, the behavior can be slightly different than in the mid-latitudes or in the polar regions. And also land use changes have an impact. So, for example, of course, we have to start with some starting point. And I think that every region is interesting because there is this possibility to find the commonalities with the other ones and exactly going into the global dimension of climate change and to analyze the specificities which are strongly related to the local characteristics of land use, for example. And I think this is really an interesting exercise. to analyze one situation, maybe another one, if there is time, and try to find the common aspects and the differences.
And then Theresa is coming with this beautiful idea of artificial glaciers. As should I interpret it, Theresa, as a critical note, or is it to celebrate nature, or how should I think about it without the final object or the final video that is not available yet?
I haven't really given it a value yet. I'd say it could be, well, calling it memorial might be like too big of a word, but going into that direction, because it's for a phenomena, like, I don't know what's the word to describe a glacier, for it's not a living being, but it's like a appearance, physical appearance, where a lot of it will disappear. So it's something, well, not necessarily now with a positive or a negative value attached, but just a state that is in flux very much. And by also looking how we can employ machine learning models in this case, I was interested to see or to think about, let's say, a machine in the future where the glaciers are gone, for example, and this machine finds this archive and then reconstructs how glaciers look like seeing it through a machine eye, let's say, in quotation marks. When future beings don't know anymore how glaciers exist, it would recreate maybe these things, and they would think, oh yeah, this is what glaciers were, maybe.
Oh, that's a beautiful and probably very educational approach in a very artistic way. This is fascinating. And in terms of your third proposal or the third part of your project, Theresa, with the glass, this also has this feeling of ice and crystals. Do you also plan to make that cold, or is it just the look of it?
No, I mean the glass will be filled with melt water, so and then sealed, so there is like water inside. I was thinking about like this process of matter transformation, like, you know, like freezing water, like letting it melt and freezing it again or something. But then, because, well, it's supposed to be a project about climate change, this costs a lot of energy, you know. It's beautiful to watch, but freezing is very expensive. So
that's a good one. And the solar panels won't be strong enough to.
Well, where in a museum would you mount that?
That's a good one. Yeah. So you also do take the sustainable aspect of your work in consideration by everything what you're doing.
Well, if the project allows for it, yes. It's not always possible, actually, because already the traveling aspect, for example, of this project is a bit of a counter aspect of the whole idea. But that's a structural challenge.
That's a challenge. I fully agree on that. And But what is then interesting for you to work together or have discussions with Theresa on the topic? What did you learn from her, or what did she reveal you never thought about?
Mm-hmm. The interesting aspect, I think, is the possibility to learn something about how to better communicate climate change issues. I do a lot of dissemination since many, many years. And what I learned from my experience is that just communicating with numbers, figures, graphs, is not enough. To engage really persons in fighting against climate change, while the use of different kinds of languages, including literature, the arts, the music also, really goes up to the emotions, into the emotions of people. And I would like just to learn from Theresa maybe some way of communicating. So my idea is really to have this interaction, to learn something from her, in order to use this new knowledge to better communicate the scientific topics during my dissemination activities.
Elisa, can you give the first takeaway for our audience, please?
Yeah, difficult to just to send one message, maybe could be this one. Climate change can be contrasted, first of all, by knowing it. And I think that the arts are one incredible way to better know about climate change.
That's a one to think about. Thank you. And Theresa, can you also share a takeaway for our audience?
Well, I'm very glad to be contributing to this project and help publicize this challenge and issues more. And maybe just some general call to shower shorter, for example, to think more about daily water usage for everyone, which is a very simple task to do.
But a very practical one to be implemented from today onwards. So lovely. Thank you so much. And I would also like to thank our online audience. Please stay tuned for more editions of the STARTS4Water vlog. And Theresa and Elisa, thank you so much for this beautiful conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.